Welcome back to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. I'm Mr. Giant and I'm back with some more vibe for all you. And this is another suggestion here again. And this one is called Canadians Change When They Hear the Word War. So I'm interested to see that because, the word war and Canada is not synonymous with each other. Well, in my opinion, I don't know much about the Canadian history, so I'm sure there's some vibe there. But, my nose is itching. I don't know why my nose is itching so much. But anyway, do some commenting below and tell me what you all think of this one, and tell me more stuff, add some information and thing. But I ain't gonna keep all you too long. We gonna go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what this is all about.
Canadians are nowadays subject to the stereotype of hockey-loving, maple syrup chugging, overly polite potheads. Their wartime stereotypes in the First and Second World Wars had their enemies trembling in their boots and making a hot mess in their trousers. It's as if when the Canadians hear the word war, their insatiable desire for maple syrup and Canadian beer turns into an insatiable desire for blood. In saying that, however, they didn't always rush enemy positions with bayonets, meat cleavers and spiked clubs, but were some of the most well-trained and formidable soldiers on any front in any war. In this video, we're going to explore Canadian wartime reputation, keeping our scope focused on World War II and the heroic feats of individual Canadian soldiers.
Okay, let's check it out. Let's check it out.
To get the puck sliding, let's move our scope quickly to the First World War, in which the Canadians laid the groundwork for their reputation as shock troopers. Mostly, the troops of the Canadian Corps were known for their savage raids on enemy trenches and their unwritten take no prisoner and kill the wounded policies. Locked in a stalemate in opposing trenches, the Canadians devised all manner of strategies and weaponry to flip the chessboard upside down and clean up the enemy pieces. Cutting through barbed wire, they crept upon them in the cover of night with painted faces, launching either savage, unforeshadowed raids or perking up their ears and eavesdropping on enemy plans. In said raids, the Canadians gorged their bayonets with blood and made good use of improvised melee weapons, paying little attention to attempts at surrender and skewering bandaged and unarmed men just the same as men on their feet with rifles. They even concocted an alchemist's shelf of homebrew explosives, like pipe bombs and jam jars loaded with nails and gunpowder. I think it's a safe bet to say that at least one grenade is made with a maple syrup jar. There are also tales of Canadian troops using temporary truces, like on Christmas Day, as a chance to catch their enemy with his stockings on, sending him grenades instead of Christmas ham and bullets through the brain instead of season's greetings. Now, it could be argued that Canadians were acting out of vengeance, but couldn't that argument be used to justify most atrocities in most wars?
Yep.
Canadian Lieutenant R.C. Germain's letter home to his parents makes the revenge excuse about as clear as the sap from a freshly tapped maple tree. After losing half of my company there, we rushed them, and they had the nerve to throw up their hands and cry "Camarade." All the camarade they got was a foot of cold steel, while I blew their brains out with my revolver. Despite being a little stab happy with enemy soldiers,
this is, you have this, it's like they started this video, you have this image of the Canadians as this peace-loving and stuff like that, but apparently they go nuts when war happened, which I did an episode on Sweden, and then they were talking about the war and stuff in Sweden and all that, and it's like, what? But I guess every nation has got its history of wars and stuff like that. So it's just that for so long you have this picture of the Canadians or the Swedes and them being this peaceful, neutral type state. Now, granted, Canada was neutral in the wars and stuff. They sent people, obviously, you know what I mean. But still, you know what I mean. Everybody think they're just like this, not so much fun-loving, but this peaceful people who have maple syrup, like the dude said. That is some crazy stuff there, Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Let's see what these Canadians are all about during wartime.
Despite being a little stab happy with enemy soldiers, Canadian troops were known for being quite, as we contemporary folk have come to expect, polite to civilian populations. Before we have a look at Canadian reputation in World War II and some of its stories, it might pay to know about Canada's involvement in the war. Canada waited until the 10th of September 1939 to declare war in Germany because it didn't want to follow Britain like a Commonwealth sheep. It took Canada until the 11th of June 1940 to declare war on Italy and the 7th of December 1941 to declare it on Japan. Overall, about 10% of Canada's population fought for her and the Allies. This amounted to around 1,100,000 Canadians serving in the Canadian Army, the Royal Canadian Navy, and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Of this 1,100,000, the majority were volunteers. Canadians fought in almost every theatre of World War II, notably in the defence of the United Kingdom, the Battle of Hong Kong, the Dieppe Raid, the invasions of Sicily and Italy, the Normandy landings and the liberation of France, and the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands.
I wonder if there's movies of Canadians
the Canadian
in the
Navy
war.
escorted Allied ships across the Atlantic and maintained a high presence in the Pacific Ocean, and pilots from the Canadian Air Force flew under the wing of the British Royal Air Force. German submarines sunk Canadian naval and merchant vessels in the water of Canada and Newfoundland and attacked the loading pier at Bell Island. And the Japanese also attacked the lighthouse on Vancouver Island, though little else occurred in Canadian waters or on mainland Canada. Of the military operations in which Canadians were involved, their ferocity and inventiveness stood out in the Battle of Ortona, the Normandy landings, and the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands. Through the medieval streets of Ortona, Italy, the Canadians and Germans engaged in brutal room-to-room, hand-to-hand fighting, with the Germans eventually having to withdraw. Here, the Canadians coined the tactic mouse holding, which is basically blowing holes in buildings to allow the passage of infantry rather than running into enemy bullets in the open. In the D-Day landings, the Canadians landed on Juno Beach, the second most resisted beachhead besides Omaha. The Canadians penetrated further inland than anyone else, coming up against some of the strongest units in the German military. In Belgium and the Netherlands, the Canadians spent thousands and thousands of Canadian lives to drive the Germans back and get food to the starving civilian populations. They even shared rations with civilians and gave them blankets. Some of the most intense combat here was in the Battle of Scheldt, where the Allies fought through flooded terrain against stiff German defences for about a month. This battle alone cost the Canadians more than 6,000 casualties. This latter triumph, particularly the part about getting food to the starving civilians, is certainly keeping with Canadian tendencies in the First World War, though the following atrocity paints a bit of a different picture. Canadian Lieutenant Colonel Frederick E. Wiggle was shot dead on approach to the town of Friseute, Germany, and a rumor spread that it was a civilian sniper from that town who shot him. Back on that revenge train, the Canadians burnt down the entire town, apparently moving its citizens onward before setting their homes on fire. It was discovered later that Wiggle was shot by German soldiers. Now, the intent of emphasizing Canadian brutality in World War I and mentioning the Friseute incident is not to take away synonymous with the Canadians in either world conflict. Like I said before, Canadians were some of the most well-trained and formidable soldiers on any front in any war, and I think the best way to communicate that is to share some stories involving some of the most heroic Canadian soldiers in World War II. On the 14th of December 1943, Canadian Captain Paul Triqueur and his company, supported by an armoured squadron, tried to cross the gully and take the Casa Berardi, a hamlet on the Orto Orsona lateral, Italy. Under heavy machine gun and mortar fire, Triqueur ran around organising and inspiring what remained of his men, saying, "There are enemy in front of us, behind us and on our flanks. There is only one safe place. That is on the objective," before charging forward and breaking through the enemy line. Triqueur's company and the supporting tank squadron pushed right up to the edge of Casa Berardi, where he set up defences and fought off a tank-supported German counterattack with whatever weapons he could find. He held the defensive perimeter against superior numbers until the rest of the battalion came in and relieved the company. Triquet's utter disregard of danger, his cheerfulness and tireless devotion inspired his men, and his tactical skill and leadership facilitated the capture at a vital point on the Ortona-Ossona lateral.
Major David Vivian Currie.
On the 18th of August 1944, Canadian Major David Vivian Currie was in command of a force of tanks, self-propelled anti-tank guns and infantry. His task was to block an escape route from the Falaise pocket in the village of Solembeux-sur-Divers, Normandy. Currie went in alone to scout German defences and to free the crew of 2 Allied tanks which were previously disabled. Under heavy mortar fire, he succeeded. The Germans then kept throwing counterattacks at Currie and his men until, on the 20th, one final German counterattack was thwarted by Currie, costing the Germans some 2,900 casualties.
Wow.
Throughout these
a lot of people dying, man.
Combat, Currie displayed gallant conduct and a contempt of danger, and collected and inspired his men. One of his officers said, "We knew at one stage that it was going to be a fight to the finish. But he was so cool about it, it was impossible for us to get excited." Over the 3 days, Currie barely got an hour's sleep, and when it was over, he fell asleep standing and then crashed to the ground. Currie's courage and devotion to duty had a far-reaching effect on the successful outcome of the battle. French-Canadian Corporal Leo Major was also in Normandy, where he captured a German armoured vehicle which held secret codes and lost an eye to a phosphorus grenade. He stayed in service, saying that he looked like a pirate. However, it wasn't in Normandy where Leo earned his first Distinguished Conduct Medal, but in the Netherlands in 1945. Actually, before we go there, Leo single-handedly captured 93 Germans in the Battle of Schell. When out on a solo reconnaissance mission in 1944, he escorted all 93 of them back to his camp, where he would not accept a DCM because he considered the person awarding it to him to be incompetent. Back to 1945 and the real DCM. After breaking his back, ribs, and both ankles when the car he was in was hit by a landmine, Leo went on a recon mission with a friend in the city of Zwolle. His friend was killed, so Major continued alone, capturing a German soldier, making the soldier take him to his officer, who was in a bar, and then telling that German officer that the Canadian artillery was going to shell and kill them all. Leo then ran through the city, firing his gun and lobbing grenades, fooling the Germans into thinking the Canadian army was invading. All through the night, Major brought captured German troops back to his camp, resting in civilian houses whenever he needed to catch his breath. He then set a Gestapo HQ on fire and assaulted a Nazi SS HQ before meeting with members of the Dutch resistance and informing them that he had liberated the entire city by himself. I've got to say, that last one is pure insanity. What an absolute machine. Overall, based on the available evidence at least, I think Canadians in World War II abandoned their unofficial take no prisoner and kill the wounded policies of World War I. Obviously, this is a generalization, and the Friseute incident certainly demonstrates that they were at least capable of unjust violence, though there is no comparing the deeds of the Canadians to, say, the Germans, the Japanese, and the Soviets. As evinced by the stories of Paul Triquet, David Currie, and Leo Major, Canadian courage and formidability was in no short supply, and I believe modern-day Canadians should be proud of how the Canadian military cleaned up their act after World War I and made such a brave and significant contribution to an Allied victory in the Second World War. Anyways guys, make sure you let me know your thoughts on Canada and some of the super soldiers we mentioned in the last bit of this video in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, make sure you check out some of the links in the description.
Wow. You know, I knew they were in the Second World War. I never knew they were in the First World War, but I knew they were in the Second World War. But nobody really highlights the stuff they did. I guess they do in Canada. And to think about it, I have a lot of family living in Canada. But see, I learn something new every day. I'm going to leave a link in the description to this video. Go check it out. Check out the channel, see what they have going on. And, you know, show them some love and thing, you know what I mean? And this was interesting. You know, I never thought of Canadians as I think it's my damn mustache that's making my nose itch so much. I'm gonna have to shave this mustache. But but anyway, this was interesting. Quite so. I hope you guys find it interesting too. I'm not gonna keep you guys here. Listen, man. I know we're looking at war stuff and we have war heroes and stuff like that. However, we need to start taking care of each other. We need to start getting to know each other. I mean, I got to know a little bit more about Canadians through this video. I think I'm gonna check out the Canadian history and see what that vibe is all about, the thing, and I'll react to something like that. But anyway, man, y'all take care of each other, all right? Be good to each other. Try to be nice to a stranger. You know what I mean? Because my mom always told me there's more good people than bad people in the world. And they're easy to find. I want to say we easy to find, but that'd be pumping myself up as a good person. I guess I am. But good people are easy to find, man. You just have to pay attention, all right? Cool runnings.